Welcome back to What Makes You Tick Best Bits. Hiring salespeople and sales leaders is really hard. Most people mess it up. It's got a 60% failure rate. If you get a senior hire wrong, it can cost you $500,000 or more. It's very painful. It can be fatal. But without being too focused on the problem, what about the solution? In this Best Bits episode, I met with Mark C. Ward, who's just a phenomenal startup and scale up consultant who helps with building operating systems that are right for the business. And we go into quite a lot of depth around hiring frameworks and systems around assessment and what you should look for and what works. And he brings his operating system and the solution into this special 20-minute version of our podcast. If you like the conversation, we'll put a link to the full episode that we did with Mark about 8-9 months ago now in the show notes. But otherwise, I think you'll enjoy this. If you've ever hired someone and you've made a mistake and you want to feel validated, or you're thinking about a big hire and you don't want to get it wrong, this might just make the difference. So enjoy. I think the mistakes that you make is what gives you the perspective, probably because it's so painful when you make them that you don't want to make them again. Yeah. But you have to push things to the edge and make some wrong calls.
Yeah.
And then analyze why that happened. Otherwise, you might just give terrible advice to people. It's like, I always think of the analogy. I remember when I was starting to do deal reviews with my sales team that I got when I became a director, and I'd never been a salesperson. I'd always done business development, taking stuff up to like 30%, right? And I was involved in like closing business, but never like the actual art and science of how to go and sell deals and all that stuff. And I would be doing deal reviews with my salespeople, and I'm trying to like coach them in the deal, but it was like I was trying to coach them to go into a room full of like, an enemy. And I'm going, yeah, just go to that next bit there. And then they go there and get shot by 15 people because I don't have that kind of like infrared vision, like, the night vision goggles where I can see all of the enemies and all of the problems. I'm just sending people off as far as I can see, which is dangerous, right? Because I have the massive blind spots too. I wonder how much of your job is about going in and helping to find out what the gaps are in leadership and helping to work out, do we have the right people in post? Are we creating the right programs and enablement to be able to take those people to a level where they don't have as many blind spots and they can see more of a night vision view of the market and the problem they're trying to solve?
Yeah, well, there's always an issue with respect to leadership. I've never, not once, ever gone into a business and gone, that's the perfect team. Nothing needs to change. If there's problems, there's always a human element, to it. And how do you, especially the private equity guys, the operating partners always say, well, how do we know we've got the right people in this business? That's always a question. And of course, there's many ways that you can assess that. I've got some strong opinions on how you assess a revenue organization. To determine are the people right or not, or do they need to be redeployed, or whatever the case may be. But having the right people in place is critical, and some roles are more important than others, especially when you're wanting to drive transformational change or growth. Your sales manager is probably the catalyst of all change, because everybody's selling, everybody underneath them, they're going to be looking directly up at the sales manager, focusing on what they focus on, caring about what they're caring about, tracking what they expect to be tracked. And so if your first line sales manager is not actively engaged and not doing what they need to be doing, you've got a serious problem. And so I would say that's a critical role. But then again, I've run so many of these programs now with organizations of all shapes and sizes. I would say and it's the smaller an organization is, the more critical it is. The CEO is intimately involved in the sales organization. They simply can't. They can't delegate it, and they can't create any sort of distance or any real distance between them and whoever's leading the sales organization, because otherwise it just doesn't work. I very recently had a situation where I was sitting opposite a CSO, and we were talking, and I asked the CSO, "Where's your growth going to come from? You're wanting to quadruple revenues in 4 years, and where's your growth going to come from?" And he had no idea. And so there was such a a startling and shocking capability gap. I have to confess, I wondered how was this person ever hired? Because the more we spoke, the more I realized they may be a chief commercial officer and they may have had, operational roles in big businesses, but just had no idea how to run a sales organization, no clue how to run a sales pipeline. And so if you've got huge capability gaps like that, best you figure out that, that you've got them and do something about them really, really quickly. Because if you invest significantly in change, but you're keeping weak people, it's to use a titled analogy, or a saying, that the chain is as weak as its weakest link. And so if you've got leaders that are fundamentally weak, you'll be squandering an opportunity, and made vulnerable throughout a change process.
Yeah, I think it's so powerful. It triggers this thing, which is I've been in tech for like 17 years. And so when I'm scoping what a business needs in terms of the people that they need in their business, which is very often different from what they tell me, we often go through maybe like 8 hours of discovery. And I've built tools around working out what type of, based on the requirements you've told me, here's what a more execution focused person would look like, and here's what a more strategic focused person would look like. Here's a scorecard. Let's go and create a view from the people who are going to be involved in making this decision around what they want. And then it determines the type of person that we're going to go and see. But my experience of working with most recruiters is that they would just say, send me your JD. What are you looking for? You want some German salespeople? Send me a JD. You want a sales manager? Send me a JD. And then they'll promise they'll go and find it. And then you get fluff. You get terrible things coming back to you because the inputs and outputs are so poor. And I just wonder, in your experience, how important is that assessment piece? Because if the inputs and outputs truth is like one of those absolutely fundamental things about business, how important is what you learn in an assessment? And could you just talk us through how that works so that you go and get the right inputs to go and give them an output, which is a system which isn't going to achieve organ failure?
Can I be a little rebellious and turn the tables and ask you a question? Because you're a talent expert and you're serving, we are serving the same sort of ideal customer environment and working in the same ecosystem.
Yeah.
And so my question to you would be that, that first sales hire is so critical for a growing business that's trying to find its feet. And the first sales management hire is also equally critical. And I've seen, as I'm sure you have, that, and especially with the UK's labor laws, where you hire somebody and they make it 4, 5, 6 months, and then you realize, well, it's the wrong person in place. I think we both know that those hires are incredibly critical. But what do you do to help your clients mitigate the risk of hiring the wrong person? And what do you do, and what do you advise them to do if they realize 4, 5, 6 months in, we've made a mistake, the performance isn't there, the person is out of their depth, and we just don't see the capability? Like a friend of mine used to say, sometimes you can't give what the good Lord left out, right? And if they just don't have the talent or the constitution to make it in the role, what do you do then, Richard?
Yeah, it's a great question. I've actually written an ebook on this, which is going to be published maybe around the same time this episode gets released. And I've touched on it a couple of times with people who are much brighter than me in podcasts to try and get their view on it as well. Because you're right, if you get that wrong, it's not just the cost of the hire. There's a bunch of data around this, but top grading say that the cost of a mishire is between 3 to 15 times someone's annual salary. When you look at like the damage, the lost opportunity cost, there's also some data around this in terms of how often people get this wrong. So obviously the average tenure of a CRO today is 17 months. 60% of first-time sales managers into startups fail. 60%. So 6 times out of 10 that founders hire their first sales manager, that sales manager fails.
Wow.
And if the sales manager fails, everyone else fails. Marketing fails, product fails, customers fail. The whole business can fail. If this is like putting an organ in that's going to go and fail, but also cause a toxic spread across all of the other organs. So how do you get it right? for me, there's a number of elements to that. Very simply, it really starts with understanding where a business is today. Like, where are you in terms of your capability? What are your gaps? What are you trying to achieve? And what's the gap to go and get there? Involving all the people who would be involved in that decision. Obviously, as a CRO directing that, or CEOs directing that, but then there's often maybe an HR director or a chief operations officer, or maybe a CFO that's involved in that too, that we need to understand what they care about and what's most important. So really deeply understanding where the business is today and what they're trying to achieve. Also, where are they in terms of their growth stage? So the thing that often de-risks it is someone who has experience of a growth stage.
Mhm.
So a failure point here is that people go, we are in this industry. Let's say, for example, cybersecurity, identity management. We're going up against some really big players in this space. We want to try and hire their sales manager, and we'll pay them really high, which is like above what you can afford. And so they'll try and find someone from industry because they have the industry experience. And my favorite word in recruitment to avoid is they have the black book. They have the Rolodex, they're going to magically get us into all of these customers. Hold on. They've worked in a £100 million business.
Yeah.
And they were there from the 100 million to 150 million range. You're a 3 million business trying to go to 5, and you've been stuck at 3 for 3 years. That person is not the person you need. They don't know what it's like to work in that lack of resource environment without a brand that people recognize. Yeah. So if you can find someone who's worked in a similar stage, ideally in the exact stage of revenue growth that you're trying to achieve, the commonalities, the trends, the patterns that exist around growing a business from that stage to that stage are so intrinsically linked that there's very likely to be a bunch of overlap in terms of their experience that they can go and do. And then what we really need to understand is, against the core requirements, the outputs, the impact that they're looking for this person to go and make, which will map against whether it's an execution or a strategy focused person. We can then go out to market and try and really assess what level of responsibility and ownership and role did that person play in that growth stage for those specific requirements. Yeah. And what that achieves is that you get this very, very clear view on, is this person a requirements fit, not against like a job responsibilities matrix, but they have done this level of work, execution or strategy work for this responsibility in a stage of company doing this thing. That's what you would call a perfect fit. And we design an assessment that exposes those things and gives people an opportunity to talk about their experience as it pertains to that responsibility. Very thorough, but it's all lined up. But I start that process by taking all those inputs and then building that into the brief. So when I'm going out to market through network or through search or through promotion, I'm talking about what those core responsibilities are up front. I ask people to submit to me, after we've had a really detailed conversation, some bullet points of the most core experience that relates to those problems, so I can share that with my client. So they have like a very truthful view, not my interpretation, what they said about it. And then we design an assessment that goes and exposes those things. The final piece on all of that, I know I've gone to quite a lot of depth there, but the final piece there is just about expectations management. You lose 50% of people because you've set the wrong expectations. So if, as a recruiter or the business, oversell where they are today, oversell the responsibility, the resources that they're going to have, oversell where they are in terms of market share, revenue, churn, like paint this really positive picture. The person comes in and they realize the capability of the team, the product, the reputation is at a completely different level. Their responsibilities are going to be completely different. The expectations are different. It breaks, even if you found the perfect person for what your business needs. So creating the right expectations up front with the client and with the person means that we go into like this agreement for that right person to join the business with such a level of clarity around how it's going to look. The de-risking of that process for everyone involved is so much higher. But the gap, and what really clear from this conversation is, there are so many different other elements, the softer elements, the below the waterline of the iceberg elements, the different parts of the business that I just don't have time to get into. And I wouldn't say I'm the best in the world at getting into those things. That it would be really useful if someone had done something like an assessment with you or they've got some external help to really get them to understand where they're trying to go, get the systems in place to be able to make sure these people are successful. What that person I'm hiring always wants is to be successful and win in their role.
Yeah.
And the founder wants that person to achieve this business impact for them. And if you're expecting the person to come in and design the systems and execute it from scratch and maybe unpick the bad stuff that's happened before,
Yeah.
and still be so execution focused that they're happy to do both, that's a unicorn that probably doesn't exist.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, I concur that somebody with a record of accomplishment in an organization or in the ecosystem in which you're playing, yeah, a record of accomplishment, at an appropriate age and stage and maturity level, is absolutely critical. I don't think you get your answers through fancy psychometrics. I think all of that is secondary. So yeah, I completely get that. And just a final quick question, just to ask you this out of curiosity.
Yeah.
For those first hires, would you take job applicants, advertise and take job applicants, or do you think that you need to go and literally approach directly, i.e. headhunt individuals who are thriving in their current role and entice them with a proposition that they can't resist?
Yeah. So my view on this is contrary to what most headhunters would say and most executive recruiters. I worked with a lot of executive recruiters when I was a client hiring for these roles myself, and they absolutely smash promotion of jobs, job boards, blah, 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 smash it. We just headhunt every role. Absolutely nonsense. They've got their own database. They promote within their database. It's just where you promote. So if they're not promoting on job boards, they're promoting within their database. And most recruiters use this whole we've got 100,000 people in our database. You're just a job board, So, and then the person executing that doesn't really know what they're looking for. So I promote all the roles that I go and hire for, as well as doing a full market search, going to my networks that I've built, the communities I've built, using my referrals that I've got, as well as going and getting a most wanted account list and headhunting. So I call it a whole of market search, but it always includes promotion. And I think that if you have something amazing, unless you can't do it because there's some political things there, or there's some sensitivities and you can't promote the role, and it is we have to go and do this in stealth mode, I will always promote a role for a company, because you'd be amazed in this market where all these mistakes have been making, where the average revenue, the retention of a CRO is 17 months, where 60% of first-time sales leaders are hiring. Often it's not the person's capability that's broken. So this whole adage that only successful people, only good people stay in businesses, and the ones who are out of work are bad, is ridiculous. It's like an archaic mentality that people would have. And my old CEO had a contrary view, which is he preferred to hire people who were out of work.
Is that so?
Because he saw it as less risky for them too. So it's like a less risky way of starting the relationship. It's not that he wouldn't want to take the best person available, but often if it was the right person and they were available, he's like, not only can I start you quicker with no notice period, you want it more, and there's a lower level of risk as well. You're not having to move country or move town or make these decisions. So my view is go wherever you can go, as wide as you can go, with a very clear brief, very clear advert that you're sharing, very clear responsibilities, and then take people through a world-class process from that point. But where you find them, I think should be as wide as you can possibly go.
Yeah, fair point. I've got a whole bunch of other questions I can ask, but I'll be derailing our flow. So.
Yeah, let's talk about maybe a bit of the solution, because we talked extensively about the problems and the blind spots, which I think is really valuable. So people feel like they're not alone and they understand. They get a sort of sniff around what it could look like in terms of solutions. But let's talk about some of the ways that you fix these things. So what are some of the solutions to the problems that we've discussed so far?
Yeah, well, there are many, but let me try and narrow this down to the most important ones. I think the first one is you've got to have an opportunity management blueprint, a single version of the truth that that everybody can reference and know exactly what needs to be done at each stage of the buying or the sales process. I think that's critical. Rarely will it be just one person that's taking an opportunity, from beginning right the way through the end. There are degrees of collaboration that need to happen, and so to iron out those collaboration protocols is critical. In today's world, your operating blueprint ultimately got to live in the CRM, and you want to be able to track very specific KPIs and metrics. So if you were to think about a distinction, I don't want to geek out here, but your measures of success need to be clear, and then your KPIs, which are measured in that CRM, also need to be clear, because you want to build data, and you want to be able to trust data over time, and it becomes a more and more reliable and more valuable source of management intelligence and so forth. So that opportunity management blueprint is absolutely critical, and I'd even go as far as to say everything else stems from that, and your sales methodology gets baked into that. So it's the right things at the right time, the right systems, processes, artifacts, assets that get used per stage. And so you might think of that, especially for a business between 5 and say 30 million that we're talking about, that opportunity management blueprint that unites all the collaborators in getting a deal over the line and giving the customer the very best experience that they can have. I think that is critical. If you were talking about a subscription business, SaaS, like for example a SaaS business, there's going to come a time where renewals becomes an issue. And I'm working with a client at the moment, and we're doing a complete transformation in terms of how they're treating renewals. So a proper blueprint that makes the RACI matrix crystal clear. Who's taking responsibility, account managers versus customer success, etc. And so that renewals blueprint needs to be done, and it needs to be crystal clear. Otherwise there's just so much revenue at risk. And then once you've got those processes in place, you can then you can build training and you can build coaching, because of course that needs to get embedded. And so I would say that that's probably the heartbeat of the business, at least the solution that we do. So many young businesses will be hiring people into the company, and they literally send them out to go and sell without any kind of onboarding or any sort of accreditation to go and sell the software or whatever it is that they're doing. And so it's younger and more immature and more scrappy businesses tend to butcher onboarding. And this is a real lost opportunity, because people take forever to get up to speed and make their number and so on. And so a really robust onboarding program with an accreditation license to sell is another thing that we do a lot of.
Thank you for listening and watching this Best Bits short. If you like this, tune in next Sunday for our next special part of our favorite episodes. And if you love the main podcast, every Thursday we introduce you to a new virtual mentor so you can hear their career story and answers to the biggest questions in tech. See you on the next episode.